Hey everyone, it's Colin. How's it going? I'm in the market for a new smartphone, but a Galaxy Note 8 is $950. An iPhone 10 is $1,000. When did smartphones get so expensive? So I've been rocking my iPhone 6 for 3 years now. I am finally due for an upgrade. So I'm weighing out my options. Of course, a new iPhone is one of the things that I'm considering, but I'm also looking at other makes and models of phones as well. But an overwhelming trend that I've noticed in the industry is that the higher end or flagship phones from various manufacturers are going for increasing amounts of money. And I'm left wondering, why are the prices going up so much? For example, like I said in the teaser, the flagship phone from Samsung, the Galaxy Note 8, is $950. The brand new iPhone 10, which was just announced as I'm filming this, and is going to be available for pre-order late October, shipping in early November, it starts at $1,000. And you may be like, oh, well, that's the Note 8. It's the highest end phone. And you may be like, well, the iPhone 10, of course, Apple is overpriced, blah, 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 blah. But it's not just those models that are more expensive. A Galaxy S8, just a regular S8, starts at $750. If you want to step up to the S8 Plus, you're looking at $850. Even a base model iPhone 8, 64 gig with the 4.7-inch screen, now goes for $700. These prices have been slowly working their way up over time, and I think there's a couple of reasons for it. The obvious answer or excuse or whatever right off the bat is going to be simply that, well, the technology is advancing. It's getting better, and they're putting better quality parts in there and higher end technology in it. So, of course, their costs are going to be higher, so they're going to charge more for the phone. And, in some ways, I think that could be true. But I don't think it's really that much. I mean, you look at where prices were just 3 years ago, and they've gone up a significant amount. For example, a Samsung Galaxy S6, when it was brand new, I found references for that phone going full price $600. Like I said, a brand new S8, which is kind of equivalent in Samsung's phone lineup, goes now for $750. $150 difference in just 3 years. So you're basically looking at every year the price is going up by $50. Is the technology that's being added in these phones really adding $50 to the price every year? And the rate of inflation isn't even that much higher only 3 years later. So, coupled with the concept of economies of scale, I mean, these big name manufacturers are going to be selling millions, literally millions of these phones. I find it really hard to believe exclusively in the argument that it's just a matter of, well, they're putting higher quality parts and better technology in these phones, and that's why the prices are going up. There's two theories or beliefs or ideas that I have as to why phone pricing has been going up. And then after we talk about that, we'll discuss what your options are if you want a new phone but aren't willing to pay that kind of money. So the first theory that I have as to why flagship phone prices are going up, and we're talking flagship, the high end, like the latest and greatest from big name manufacturers, why those prices are going up, why the S8 is now $150 more than it was from the S6, why the iPhone goes up an extra $50 every year, that sort of thing. First theory that I have is that the smartphone manufacturers know that we're reaching, or maybe have even reached, peak smartphone, right? We're getting very much at the point, if we haven't reached it already, where everybody who will buy a smartphone, a premium quality like flagship smartphone, everyone who will buy one has already bought one at some point. So there are no really new customers to add. We're only in a replacement cycle at this point. I also think the manufacturers realize that the rate of innovation has been slowing down, right? The latest things that we've been seeing haven't necessarily been these great breakthroughs in performance. Yes, phones get faster every year, but they're not getting like twice as fast every year or anything like that. It's, I wouldn't say marginal, but not huge increases. The biggest things where we've seen phone innovation has really just been camera quality and display size, right? The big trend for 2017 is now minimal bezels around the phone, right? Where you don't have what they call the forehead and the chin at the top and the bottom of the phone, like where the earpiece is and the home button is, that sort of thing. Minimizing those bezels is the big trend. And that's, kind of the latest and greatest feature in these phones. It's not, new, better technologies. I mean, before that, it was waterproofing. The year before that, when we started seeing waterproof phones, that was a big thing. Waterproofing doesn't really add a ton of cost to the phone. And yeah, it may be a novel feature and it may be welcome by a lot of people. I think all phones should be waterproof, but it's not really mind-blowing like smartphones were maybe 6 or 7 years ago, right? We were at a point, say around 2010, 2011, maybe in there, where smartphones were really taking off. And the rate of change every year was huge. Like going from standard resolution displays to high DPI displays. If you're familiar with Apple's phones, going from the iPhone 3GS to the iPhone 4 and its Retina display. Retina display was a major innovation. And there have been lots of other innovations that other manufacturers have come out with as well in the smartphone arena. And a lot of that major kind of mind-blowing stuff really happened a few years ago. We're getting at a point where it's like we're looking at these new phones. Yeah, that's cool. That's nice. But we're seeing more incremental change. So I think the manufacturers realize this. I think they realize that the wow factor is starting to diminish. And people are finding less and less reasons to want to jump on the latest and greatest phone every year or every 2 years. Case in point, I'm pretty deeply embedded with technology, right? I talk about it all the time on the channel. I work in technology for my day job. You would think that I'd be out going and getting a new phone every year. And I'm rocking an iPhone 6 right now, a 3-year-old phone. It's just because upgrading to the newer phones since then really hasn't been worth the money. The rate of innovation hasn't really been that much different. I mean, yeah, like screen quality has gotten a little bit better, but my iPhone 6 is a 4.7 inch, high DPI display, and the brand new iPhone 8 base model, 4.7 inch high DPI display. There's some small tweaks here and there, but nothing really earth-shattering, right? So I think manufacturers realizing people are keeping their phones longer, they're finding fewer reasons to want to upgrade. Yes, there are still plenty of people who will upgrade and jump on the major phone. And I think this year, especially for iPhone owners, will probably be a big year. I feel like there were a lot of people who jumped in on the iPhone 6, and that was an incredibly popular series, who kept their phone through the 6S and the 7 and are now jumping on the latest and greatest. Same thing with people who have Galaxy S5s and S6s. They kept with them for a few years just because, the S7, kind of a minor incremental change, and the S8 may be enough to sway them, maybe enough to push them to upgrade again. All of this stuff, and it seems a little counterintuitive, but it's, I think, causing manufacturers to raise the prices. The reason why I think manufacturers are raising prices, part of it is because they want to keep making a ton of money, and, raising the prices on products is one way to do it. But the other thing is the whole concept of implied value, right? You look at so-called luxury products, high-end products, and it doesn't even have to be a smartphone or even in the technology space, right? It can be any sort of good that you can go out and consider a luxury good. Fashionable clothing, that sort of stuff. Is that stuff really manufactured that much better than commodity stuff? Like if I were to go out and buy a pair of jeans from, a regular store, say the Gap, and I go out and buy a pair of jeans for like $40. Are a pair of jeans from a luxury goods store with a price tag of $200, $300, are those really that much better than those $40 jeans? In terms of, quality of the product and all that, maybe not that much better. But people will look at that price tag and think, oh, that must be better quality. Another brand that I've got kind of a love-hate relationship with, although it's a little more on the hate side than it is on the love side, is Bose. I'm a little bit of a stickler for audio quality. I know how I want my audio to sound, and there's really only a couple of products that Bose manufactures that I think are actually kind of worth the money. The rest of the stuff really seems overpriced to me. Yet you look at Bose and how much product it sells for the relatively high prices that it charges, and what you actually get out of that product in terms of performance and build quality. A lot of people who aren't even that crazy of audiophiles will say, you can get better products for the same amount of money, if not less, better sound quality for the same amount of money, if not less, than buying Bose. Yet Bose sells a ton of products and they make a lot of money doing it. And their products are priced relatively high. That's a great example of it. People who don't necessarily know better, and maybe some people who do even know better, will get enthralled by the marketing and they'll look at the price tag and they'll go, boy, maybe that product is worth the money. They're charging that much for it. Maybe it's worth that price. And so I think maybe smartphone manufacturers are kind of starting to play that game a little bit. They figure, well, if we price these products at a premium, then people will start to feel that it's more of a premium product. And it'll kind of entice some people in, $1,000, that's a lot of money for a smartphone, but at some point, you think, boy, $1,000, that must be a really nice phone. It must be super durable and super fast and have all the latest features and all that. And even to a small subconscious part, maybe it's also like, it's $1,000 phone and your friends know that it's $1,000 phone. You're kind of showing off if you buy the $1,000 phone and let your friends see that you've got that $1,000 phone. You know what I mean? It's a psychology thing. So that's one reason why I think prices on premium smartphones are going up. Reason number 2, and this is a little bit more indirect, but stick with me here. So you think about what we did with computers maybe 5 or 6 years ago, right? What the average person, and I admit that a lot of the people watching or listening to this podcast are probably not the typical technology user, right? You're probably a nerd like me. So just kind of think a little more open-minded as I lead you through this one. The average person, what do they do with technology, right? What do they do with computers? What did they do, I should say, 5 or 6 years ago when it came to computers? You've got so-called Joe Sixpack. He works all day at the office and he comes home. What is he going to do on a computer when he comes home? Well, they're going to do something like maybe watch videos, right? Watch YouTube, watch Netflix, whatever. Maybe listen to some music. Maybe just screw around on the internet, surf the web, read the news, that kind of stuff. And then probably some mundane kind of things like go shopping on Amazon or eBay. Go check your checking account, your online bank, pay bills online, that sort of stuff. Just kind of, light duty web browsing, content consumption kind of stuff is what the vast majority of people use the computers for in their free time, their leisure time, when they're not at work. And that's the majority of like non-technical people. Of course, I come home and I sit down and I fire up like Final Cut Pro and Pixelmator and do all this creative work. And I'm sure others of you go out and, write code for video games and do all this other, technical stuff. And we're the exception. But the average person, they're not asking a whole lot. 5 or 6 years ago, you pretty much did all of that on a computer. It'd probably be a laptop, maybe a cheap desktop. Could you do some of that on a smartphone? Yeah, you probably could, but it'd be a clunky experience, right? 5 or 6 years ago, you'd, want to go check your bank account. Well, you'd probably have to open up the web browser on the smartphone and go to your bank's website. And maybe your bank was kind of with it and had a, mobile optimized, in quotation marks, version of their site. But let's admit it, even using a mobile optimized website can be pretty clunky, especially when you need to input information into it. When you need to key in a username and password and go through an interface that was originally designed for use on a desktop or laptop browser that's really just been kind of squished down and reformulated for use on a smaller screen. It's clunky. You could do it 5 or 6 years ago, but nobody really wanted to. It wasn't that easy. It was frustrating. But let's fast forward to today. We've got apps for all of that, right? You don't really need to use the web browser on the phone as much anymore. If you want to do online banking, you just go and download the app for your bank. You've probably got bill pay automatically set up. If you want to shop on Amazon or eBay, any of the online shopping kind of stuff, there are apps for those too. And there's, of course, apps for all the media consumption stuff. There's a YouTube app and a Netflix app and Hulu and all these other streaming services and stuff. And the big difference is these apps are optimized and designed specifically for use on a small mobile device. The people who wrote the apps knew exactly what the app was going to be used on. So they were able to make the interface work well on a smaller screen. And that's the big difference between now and I feel, back then is people didn't want to do a lot of that stuff on their phone. Their phone was really kind of just this accessory they checked periodically for a few things, for little snippets of information. But now I feel people are using phones and to some extent tablets much more heavily. And you look at the sales numbers of PCs, laptops, desktops, personal computers as a generic term, and they've been trending downward for several years now. Part of it is because, yes, PCs have also slowed in their rate of innovation and people are finding fewer reasons to go out and buy a new one as frequently. But I also think a lot of people just aren't using PCs casually as much anymore because their smartphone is good enough. My own wife, I live in a geek household. My wife is as big of a nerd as I am. She's got a MacBook Air and a tablet and a smartphone. She hardly ever turns on the MacBook Air. I can't remember the last time she powered it on and used it. Practically everything she does gets done through the phone or the tablet now. I've got lots of other family members who are the same way. They hardly ever really need their computer anymore. Lots of people, they just do it all on a mobile device because the mobile devices have gotten capable enough to do that kind of stuff. And the world has caught up to people who want to do that kind of stuff on a mobile device. So why pricing has gone up is because the smartphone manufacturers realize that they're actually in some ways taking over another market segment. And so money is kind of getting freed up if you think about it, right? You'd go and you'd buy a new phone every 2 or 3 years, and maybe you'd go and buy a new computer every 4 or 5. Well, if you realize, hey, I'm coming due for a new laptop and a new phone, but I hardly ever use the old laptop anymore. Maybe I just get a new phone. Maybe I forget the laptop. I think the smartphone manufacturers are going to bring prices up because they realize they can capture more of that money. Instead of having you buy both a mid-priced laptop and a mid-priced smartphone, you still end up saving money in the long run by just not buying the laptop and spending a bit more on a higher-end smartphone. Spend the money where you're going to use it. If you're hardly going to use a laptop, why spend that kind of money and have that be less money that you can spend on the phone that you may be using all the time? You get where I'm going with the logic here? So I think phone prices basically are going up. High-end phone prices, I should say, are going up because laptops are dying out, because computers, PCs are dying out. The so-called post-PC era is really upon us. And I don't think PCs, of course, are ever going to go away completely. But for the average casual user, a smartphone is really all the more they need. So what if you're due for a new phone and these prices just don't work for you? For example, I'm gasping a little bit at the price of the iPhone 10 for $1,000. It's a strong contender on my list. I'm not going to commit right now to saying that's what I'm going to buy, but it's a strong contender because it looks like a really nice phone. But $1,000, boy, there's a lot of other stuff that I could buy for $1,000, especially considering that my iPhone 6, when I got it, it was only $650. Is that difference in price really going to be worth it? Well, for someone who really wants that flagship phone, the first thing to think about is to amortize it out longer, right? Instead of saying, I'm going to buy a new phone now and then I'm going to buy a new phone in 2 years, think, well, you know what? Maybe I'll try and eke 3 years out of it, right? So, if it's $1,000 phone or a $900 phone, let's say it's $900. Instead of saying, well, it's $450 a year, and then in 2 years, I'm going to get rid of it and buy something else. Well, if you can manage to rock it for 3 years, it's $300 a year. Maybe it's a little bit easier to swallow if you think of it that way. And of course, carrier financing, if you do the whole, it's not really the traditional subsidized contract stuff like it was anymore, at least here in the US. Now it's basically you just take out a 0% loan from the, mobile carrier that you're using and pay installments over the course of 2 years for your phone. I mean, yeah, you could do a plan like that where you're paying $35, $40 a month for a flagship phone. But, some people prefer to think of it as just that large lump sum, $900, $1,000. I tend to think of things that way myself instead of being lulled into the whole idea of, well, it's only $30 a month. Yeah, $30 a month times 24 months. What's that? So there's a couple other options. The first is just don't buy a flagship phone, right? Look at other phones. And this, I think, is where things are in some ways the most exciting. Yeah, there's some really cool, awesome stuff going on in the flagship smartphone space. But where I think the real change and innovation is actually happening are in lower priced phones. So there are really kind of 3 tiers to phones, at least in my mind: low end, mid range, and flagship. Flagship we've already talked about. The low end phones are interesting at this point, although I'll admit they're a little bit of a minefield. You can get phones for as cheap as $100, $200. Pretty decent quality smartphones. They're almost always going to be Android based. One that immediately drew my attention when starting to look this stuff up. And of course, there's no way that I can talk about every model of smartphone possible in this episode. So if I didn't talk about one that you feel is important, it's not because I don't think it's important. It's just I only have so much time. But one low-end phone that kind of caught my attention is the Samsung Galaxy J7. It's a 5.5-inch phone, really big size screen. And it offers an 8-megapixel camera, decently fast processor. It's not going to set the world on fire or anything, but it's going to be fast enough to get out of its way. And it even has a replaceable battery, which these flagship phones just don't have anymore. You can pull the back off, put a new battery in if you need to. It's going to be a decent phone if your needs aren't that big. Of course, the 8-megapixel camera isn't going to be the latest and greatest, and there's only going to be one on the back, but it'll take pretty decent pictures. Yeah, it's lacking a fingerprint reader, so you're going to lose the biometric kind of stuff, and especially like the NFC tap to pay sort of features, which are convenient, but, not always necessary. And that 5.5 inch screen is only 720p resolution. So it's not necessarily that super high dense DPI, the so-called Retina display that a lot of newer phones, higher end phones have had for a while now. But here's the kicker with that phone. Full price, $240. That's just cheap. That is downright cheap for a smartphone with specs like that. Now, like I said, it's kind of a minefield because there are other phones for that price, if not less, that are just complete garbage. So you totally want to do your homework in this respect if you're interested in a cheap phone. But you know what? Cheap phones are getting kind of good these days. The next step up in the market is the mid-range phone, and this is where we've seen explosive growth. There have been a whole bunch of new models and even new manufacturers that have been jumping into that market. These are phones that are in the, I would say, maybe $400 to $600 kind of range. You know, not really flagship priced, but not necessarily super cheap either. But you can get a killer deal. One great example is the OnePlus 5. Its top spec model has 8 gig of RAM, dual cameras, and 128 gig of storage. And it goes for $540. 8 gig of RAM, 128 gig of storage, dual cameras. That's starting to push you actually into Galaxy S8 type of territory in terms of specs. Maybe not, completely level playing field, but it's nipping at the heels of those big name manufacturers. $540. It's priced like a mid-range phone. So like my fellow YouTuber MKBHD, if you don't watch him, you should, because the guy knows a lot about this part of technology. But he's got a saying, good phones are getting cheap and cheap phones are getting good. And that is absolutely the case. So don't necessarily feel like you have to go for the flagship. Broaden your horizons a little bit. Look around at different makes and manufacturers. There are some other manufacturers that are also really kind of making names for themselves, especially the Chinese manufacturers, ones that used to just do contract assembly and now are getting into designing the phones themselves. There are more smartphone manufacturers now than there ever have been before, and a lot of them are putting out really good product. And the prices, they got to stay competitive because they're a brand new manufacturer. They've got to try and make a name for themselves. Coming in at an affordable price is a great way for them to do it. So it's putting some pressure, I feel, on the flagship makers, but the flagship phone makers seem to be responding by raising prices instead of lowering them for those reasons that I mentioned earlier. Anyway, I am curious, of course, as to your thoughts. Is there a particular phone that you feel is the best value? Are there other mid-range phones that you could recommend? Of course, I only covered a couple of alternative options for phones. There are just a ton of them out there, other than like the OnePlus 5 or the Galaxy J7. Do you have other ideas or experiences with less expensive phones? Shout those out down in the comments below, along with let me know if you're going to pick up one of the new kind of current crop of high-end flagship phones, the S8, the Note 8, the iPhone 8 or iPhone 10. Hit me up with all your thoughts down in the comments. Also, real quickly, if you're interested in an MP3 version of this podcast, I know some of you want to be able to listen to it on the go. That is available for my Patreon supporters for as little as $1 a month. If you become a Patreon supporter, you will get early access to an MP3 version of this podcast a couple of days before they come out on YouTube. So just something for you to think about. Anyway, if you like the video, I would appreciate a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at thisdoesnotcomp. And as always, thanks for watching.